Charlton Singleton, and welcome to this episode of Raising the Volume. Today, we have a distinguished gentleman in our midst, one that is no stranger to the Lowcountry scene with regards to medicine, all things that are good health, of course, and a couple of other things that I'm going to get into that you might not know about our guest. So please welcome Dr. Thaddeus John Bell to the program today.
Thank you very much, and happy Founders Day to you,
yes,
my brother.
Yes, sir. Happy Founders Day.
Thank
we're
you very
also
much.
Members of the same fraternity, Omega Psi Phi, and today we're celebrating our anniversary, Founders Day.
That's exactly right.
So now let's catch everyone up a little bit and start from the beginning. Now,
okay.
I have known you for a number of my years, of course, and I assumed that you are born here, but you're not originally from Charleston.
No, I'm from Columbia, South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
I was reared in Allen Benedict Court.
Mm-hmm.
The projects.
That's right.
The beloved projects, I might add. And then I went to C.A. Johnson High School and graduated from C.A. Johnson. And then went to the South Carolina State College at the time.
That's right.
Which is now a university.
It's my alma mater too.
That's right. And then eventually got married and came to Charleston and taught school for a couple of years, and with my eye always being on going to medical school. And so in 1972, I got admitted to the Medical University of South Carolina right here in Charleston, and graduated in 1976, and then went back to Columbia to do my postgraduate training in family medicine at Richland Memorial. Did 3 years there, and then eventually came back to Charleston, and the rest is history.
The rest is history.
I've been here ever since.
Okay, all right.
That's right.
So let's dissect, because there's so much that you do around here and that you've done over the course of your life. Now, I am going to sort of preface this a little bit, or get into this a little bit in a weird way. When I was a little boy, one day I complained of a chest pain or something, and my father just scooped me up and he said, "We're gonna go to the doctor," and he brought me to see you. Now I know you probably don't remember this.
Wow, is that right?
Yeah, he brought me to see you, and I think I had pulled like a muscle or something, and you basically said, it's nothing, to be worried about, or whatever. He just probably twisted some or whatever. And so on the ride home, though, I remember my father talking very highly about you, and he said, "Oh, and also he's a big track star. He can really run." And I just said, okay, Later on, I started seeing all of these clippings and things in the news about Dr. Bell, this doctor that we know of medicine, but this big track star. So tell me a little bit about what's up with the track.
Well, when I was at C.A. Johnson High School, I played football and was a pretty good football player. And in fact, my high school team won the state championship. It probably was, it was one of the last state championships that was won by 4A high school. The high schools at that time were segregated. We came down here we came to Georgetown to play. So I've always been an athlete and was always impressed with being an athlete. I was gifted with good speed. However, I never ran track because at the end of football season, I turned my attention to the National Science Fair, which I was the winner of my senior year
Wow, okay.
in high school.
Okay.
So people always want to know, well, why didn't you run in high school? And it was because I turned my attention away from football and I did these science projects, which were at South Carolina State. So I represented South Carolina in 1962 at the International World's Fair in Seattle, Washington.
Wow.
I was the science fair winner.
Wow.
But anyway, to make a long story short, so I love running, and so when I got ready to go to college, my dad said, okay, I want you to concentrate on graduating from college. I don't think you can be an athlete and a scholar at the same time, and so he forbidden me from playing football or running track or anything like that. But as somebody reminded me a couple of years ago, they would always see me running across campus. So when I graduated from South Carolina State, I played football with a team here in Charleston called the Charleston Sports. And
Semi-pro.
Semi-pro.
Yeah, semi-pro.
Semi-pro football team. I experienced a measure of success playing with the Charleston Sports. Tried out with the Washington Redskins. Probably didn't know that.
No.
I tried out with the Washington Redskins. George Allen had moved from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C., and put a notice in the paper that anybody who wanted to come and try out with the Washington Redskins could
Anybody
come.
could just walk on like
Yeah,
that?
you could. So I jumped on the Greyhound bus and went to Washington, D.C., and tried out along with 300 other people.
Wow. Okay.
And out of the 300, he kept 3. I was one of them. And the reason that he kept me is because I ran the 40-yard dash in a 4.3.
4.340.
4.340.
4.340.
43.40. And so I got invited to come back. And while this was during the summertime, while I was there, my dad got very sick and eventually passed away. So I came home and helped my mom deal with that. Went back to Washington, and I got cut the week later. Probably had a lot to do with just my mental state. I just was not into it, but I had already been accepted to med school, and so I said, well, I'll just pursue my the second thing that I wanted to do, which was go to med school. And then after graduating from med school, I still had this burning desire to be an athlete. And someone said, have you ever heard of Masters Track and Field? I'd never heard of Masters Track and Field. So one day I was at the Citadel working out back during the day. And it was interesting because they didn't allow a whole lot of black people to come on the campus of the Citadel to work out. Mm-hmm. But I'd go over there and I met the coach, and he told me that I could work out there. And a friend saw me running, and he said, you know, I think that you can do well in Masters Track and Field. And so in 1985, I got introduced to Masters Track and Field, and in 1987, I won the World Championship down in Melbourne, Australia, and I ran the 100-meter dash in 10:92.
So now, and that was a record?
That was a record at that time.
At that time.
All right, but it was one of the fastest times that had ever been run in Masters Track and Field at that time.
So now, just really quick, what's the criteria for Masters?
Okay, so at that time, I was in the 40 to 45 age group, so I was 43 years old.
Okay.
And so I went to Columbia, won a couple of track meets. People saw me running, suggested that I learn how to run because they say, you run like you stole something from the police. So I sought the help of a very good friend of mine who I met through track and field, a fellow by the name of Charlie Green, who was a world-class sprinter and was a gold medal winner in the '68 Olympics on the relay team. And he became my coach and actually taught me how to run like a sprinter.
Right.
Because I was still running like a football player.
Technique.
Technique. And so after I learned how to do that, my times just came down from, I was running like 11.5, and my times just started dropping. And in Melbourne, Australia, I on a afternoon in November, right around this time of year, I won the world championship in the 100-meter dash. And so I went on to win. I won the world championship one other time in Eugene, Oregon. And then I also, my daughter keeps reminding me that I won also the World Medical Games twice. This was for doctors who ran track. And so I went to France and I won that on 2 different occasions. And so I had a very interesting career. At the end of 2000, I was recognized by the Post and Courier as one of the best athletes in track and field of the 20th century for South Carolina. So that's
the track story.
That's the track story, right?
Okay.
Right.
So
So a lot of people just knew me for running. They had no idea that I practiced medicine. They knew I was a doctor, but I was in the Charleston area. I probably was more known for my track and field exploits than I was for practicing medicine.
Okay. All right. Amazing. I mean, like I said, I think a lot of folks from my generation and younger probably know you more so as Dr. Bell for your practice,
Right.
you know, and everything.
Right.
But me being a sports fan, I just remember from when my father told me about it, and then
Well, one other thing that I'm very proud of that we did. So as a result of coming in contact with all of these world-class athletes, one year I was the doctor for the track and field championships over in Europe. But the thing that I want to mention is that we started the Bell and Slough track and field seminar for little kids.
Bob
Slough.
Yeah.
Well, Bob Slough, at that time, Charleston, a lot of people didn't know it, but at that time that I was world champion, Bob Slough was one of the best long distance runners in the United States.
I remember, didn't he win the bridge one?
Oh yeah, several times, yeah.
Yeah,
and so literally our paths crossed over at Citadel working out. And I said to him, I said, you know, Bob, we should introduce running to this community. And I said, it's really interesting because you're a long distance runner of note, and I'm a world-class sprinter of note. And so we put together the Bell and Slough, and for about 20 years, we had the Bell and Slough up at Charleston Southern, in which we invited little kids from all over the community to come and learn how to run. And the interesting thing about it is because of the people that we knew, we invited them down. So we had many world-class athletes and Olympians to come to Charleston Southern to be a part of our track and field seminar.
Amazing, David.
Yeah.
Bill.
Yeah.
So you jumping back into the whole story now.
Right.
You don't end up with the football team, but you said at that time that's when you started medical school.
Yes, I had been accepted during the time that I tried out. I was like 28 years old, and I had already tried to get into the medical university on several occasions, but at that time, the medical university was not accepting African Americans. A lot of folk don't know that the medical university didn't start accepting African Americans until about 1966. The first African American to graduate from the medical university was Dr. Bernard Days, who is really from Charleston, graduate of Burke High School. He went to the medical university, and they gave him a hard time there. He eventually graduated and went on to have a very distinguished career in the Air Force, and ended up being an Air Force colonel, was an oncologist, and ironically enough, passed away from prostate cancer. Okay, but I got a chance to invite him back to the medical university, because at that time I was director of diversity at the medical university, and knew of his history and knew how much he disliked it, and I encouraged him to come back so that we could honor him and give him his due respect, which the university eventually did. So that was something that was very, very worthwhile.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So once you finished your studies at the medical university, did you automatically just stay on there, or did you start your own practice?
I did. When I graduated from the medical university, I did my residency at Richland Memorial in Columbia, and then I came back to Charleston, and I couldn't decide whether or not I wanted to go into family medicine, go into private practice, or whether I wanted to work for an organization. During my time of training, I had a very positive experience at the Sea Island Clinic out on Johns Island. And so I decided that I wanted to work with the underserved population and people who did not have insurance. And so I was hired by the Beaufort Jasper Comprehensive Health Center in Beaufort, South Carolina. So I drove back and forth from Charleston. And during that period of time, I got board certified in family medicine. And I was literally in the grocery store and ran into one of my professors who said, "What are you doing? You know, we would like for you to come to the VA hospital. And I have a job that's going to be opening up. And I'd like for you to come to the VA hospital to work on the psychiatry service." So I said, "Wow, I'm a family doctor, but you want me to come and work on the psychiatry service?" He said, "Yes, because the psychiatry service was beginning to see a lot of patients who were coming back from Vietnam who were addicted to drugs and alcohol as a result of their experience in Vietnam. And the VA had not developed the right type of attitude to take care of these patients like they needed to. So he wanted to have his own medical doctor working with psychiatrists. So he invited me to come back. So I did, and I stayed at the VA for 6 years. And during the time that I was at the VA, I got invited to be a member of the faculty at the medical university. So I joined the faculty in family medicine at MUSC. And during that time, I was also joined the Air Force.
What? Well, wait. Now I know my schedule is hectic, but you are at two hospitals.
Yeah, I was working in the emergency room one night for a friend of mine who every weekend he'd ask me, "Thad, would you be on call for me at Trident Hospital?" So one day I pulled him aside. I said, "Where are you going doing, what are you doing on the weekend that you can't work?" He said, "Look, man, I'm a flight surgeon in the Air Force." And he said, "Every weekend I fly all over the world as a flight surgeon." I said, "Really? I want to try that." So I joined the Air Force Reserve, and I went to flight medicine school and got my flight surgeon certificate. And for 10 years, I did the same thing. So I was a flight surgeon in the Air Force for about 10 years.
Wow.
At the Charleston Air Force Base. So
I
was kind of doing all of these things at the same. I was a multitasker, no question about that.
Yeah. So now you mentioned something when you were talking about about your time in Beaufort, and you just barely said the sentence, but I know the sentence you said for the underserved.
Right.
And that's the motto of Closing the Gap.
Well, there's a story behind that. So I had always said to myself that if I ever got in medical school, that I would, if the good Lord let me in and help me get out, I would always give back. So when I got in and I got out, I remembered that I promised the good master that I would always give back. So one day a friend of mine from Cross, South Carolina, came to me and said, "Hey man, we need a health center in Cross, South Carolina. People are not getting good health care at Trident Hospital at that time. It's too far to come. Would you consider opening up a free health clinic in Cross?" I said, "Y'all not gonna pay me nothing?" They said no. So Berkeley County gave the little town across this little building, which we converted into a health center. And so for 9 years, I ran a health center in Cross, South Carolina at night. So I'd work at the VA during the daytime, go to Cross and work from 6 until 11 o'clock at night. And we would see like 50 or 60 patients. And while I was there at Cross, the sheriff came by to see me one night around 11 o'clock. He requested to see me, and of course people in the waiting room, we wonder what did Dr. Bell do? The sheriff wants to see him. Sheriff Cannon up there in Berkeley County. And he asked me, he said, "Listen, Dr. Bell, we need a doctor to work in the Berkeley County jail. So when you leave Cross on your way going home, will you stop by the Berkeley County jail and see patients?" He said, "Because we need a black doctor because there are a lot of black people incarcerated. We think you'd be the right person for the job." And I said, "Listen, man," I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." And it was one of the best, and I was there for about 10 years. So I helped start the Cross Family Health Center, which is now the Elijah Wright Health Center, because Elijah Wright was the community leader who actually came to me and asked me would I do that.
Right.
And so, rightfully so, the health center a couple of years ago was named the Elijah Wright Family Health Center in Cross, South Carolina. And it is now a part of Franklin C. Fetter, the Fetter Network. And so it has a new building, and it takes care of a lot of people. They're doing a very, very fine job there.
So, okay, when did you, is that around the time, or when did you, I guess, establish Closing the Gap?
Well, during the period of time in which I was...
And hold on, could you really just quickly explain what Closing the Gap is?
Yes. Closing the Gap in Healthcare for African Americans and the Underserved is a program that I started about 15 years ago, because I recognized after my clinical experience in Beaufort and also at the Medical University and up in Cross, and as well as my private practice, I recognized that, and also my experiences in medical school, I recognized that African Americans and the underserved population were dying sooner. Our lives were cut short. We had more disease, more illnesses. Not to mention the healthcare profession was treating us very, very poorly, which also contributed to our outcome. That's defined as health disparities. So I decided that the one thing that I could do to help change that, based on my experiences, was to educate African Americans about health care. One of the things that I learned very, very early in my medical experience at the medical university is that we were taught how to talk to doctors, but we were not taught how to talk to patients, particularly black people. I also discovered through a lot of reading that black folk had a lot of mistrust with the healthcare profession for a lot of reasons. Over 400 years of bad history of medicine and black people. With the Tuskegee experiments, which you are familiar with, being one of the bad experiences. Right. And that contributed to our mistrust and not paying attention to what doctors said. But the other thing that I also discovered is that in our culture, we also had a lot of myths and untruths that we operated by that contributed to our death and contributed to our bad outcome. So I noticed all of this as I was practicing. And so being the old school teacher, remember now, because I taught school before I went to medical school.
You did, yeah.
I taught school for about 5 years before I went to medical school. I said, you know, someone needs to address this issue. So during the time that I was at the medical university, I recognized that another cause of the health disparities was not having enough African Americans practicing the medicine. So I put together some major programs at the medical university during the time that I was director of diversity there to increase the number of African Americans in the healthcare profession in general and in medicine specifically. Because one of the things that I recognized during the time that I was director of diversity there, and I was director of diversity for all 6 colleges. So I recognized that we needed more black nurses, more black doctors, more black pharmacists. We needed more black everything, all right? Because the system was not dealing with us in a way in which I felt comfortable with. And I was not the only person. This was getting to be very pervasive, and the whole country who looked at these kind of issues recognized that this was just not occurring here in Charleston. It was occurring throughout the entire country. In fact, I went to a conference in 2005, conference sponsored by the National Medical Association, which is made up of all of the black doctors in the United States. And at the conference, they talked about health disparities. And a lecture that I went to, at the end of the lecture, the doctor said, if black doctors don't do something to educate African American patients, our outcome is going to continue to be like it is. And that just, a light bulb just turned on in my head. And I remember going back to my room and I just started writing health tips. The thing I didn't realize though, that in order to put health tips on the radio, somebody got to pay for that.
It costs money. Yeah, you gotta have
right.
radio money.
You gotta have.
Yeah,
and the other thing I realized that you can't write an essay.
Right, exactly.
You gotta write health tips that are 1 minute long.
Short to the point.
And they can't be using 3-syllable words. They gotta be culturally sensitive. They gotta be something that black people will listen to. They gotta be funny, and they have to be the truth.
Right.
And so that's the model that I began to put together to start closing the gap. And so within about 3 years, I knew I was on to something because we got a major award from the state of South Carolina. And then I convinced the radio stations to sponsor Closing the Gap until we found a sponsor. And then after I found a sponsor, it was hard to convince people that what we were doing was actually educating people. People thought in the beginning that I was really promoting my own practice. And so, in fact, I never shall forget when I got my 501(c), I got a call from the federal government. They said, well, why should we give you this 501(c) when you just promoting your own practice? And I said, well, no, because when I write a health tip, I never ask people to come to my practice. I don't put down any telephone number. I do have to say my name,
Right.
because you can't be putting out information and people don't know who you are.
Right.
So a long story short, we became an award-winning program, and the medical university, my alma mater, bought into what I was doing, and they gave me a grant to look at whether or not we were being successful with educating people in the Tri-County area. It was a $100,000 grant that they gave me. And so the bottom line was that we were making a major contribution in educating the African American population, as well as the white population. I never shall forget, I got a letter from someone, I presume it was a white lady because I could tell the way the letter was written, and she was chastising me for coming on radio and just speaking directly to African Americans. She wanted to know, well, why don't you ever talk about white people? So after reading the letter, I waited for a couple of days, and I wrote her a nice letter back explaining to her what health disparities were, and explaining to her that the burden of disease as it relates to diabetes, cancer, hypertension, heart disease, stroke, obesity was higher in the African American population than any other population in the world. And she wrote me back and apologized. She said she did not know that. So I knew I was on the right track with reference to educating people.
Yeah, well, I know just with me and my schedule and going out and being in the car and listening to the radio and hearing your commercials, you know, to come on, and your tips and everything, it definitely does make a difference when you hear, you know, some of these, you know, things that you may think of as every day, and you break them down in like 30 seconds or a minute or so, and you know, sometimes those tips are they're definitely life-changing for folks.
Yeah.
I mean, even you know, some of the simplest things like you know, I don't think there's a black family that doesn't have, you know, Kool-Aid in there, you know, and the amount of amount of sugar and everything, and just how important it is, you know, just to maybe if you take out the Kool-Aid and you just drink water, you know, every day, and how important, you know, just glasses of water, you know, are. But
yeah,
just,
we've talked about that because a lot of people thought that the universal drink was Pepsi and Coke.
Right.
And they didn't realize that this is the universal drink.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the most healthiest drink that you can consume.
Water.
And water.
Clean water.
Clean water. And that the other drinks that we've been drinking, while they may taste good, they're a major cause of heart disease, hypertension, obesity, diabetes. A major cause.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's one of the issues that we are still dealing with in our, you know, in our community. Sugary drinks is just bad for your health. People come in and say, well, you know, I'm allergic to water.
Allergic to water.
And I have to remind them, okay, if you get sick today and go to the emergency room and they give you an IV, it ain't gonna be an IV of Coke. It's gonna be water with some salt in it called saline. So how can you be allergic to something which you are made up of?
Right.
A lot of people don't realize that 60% of the body is water. And in order to stay healthy, you have to drink water. And when you get thirsty, and if you don't drink water, you go get sick. So even just educating people about water is very, very important. The other thing that people don't realize, you know, one of the things that was real popular in Charleston, you're not going to believe this, but people thought that, you know, in order to control your blood pressure, you just put some moss under your shoe. You ever heard that?
Yes.
You
Well,
put
see, I'm from the country, so so moss
Okay.
in the
You
shoe
put
and a
some-
whole
You put some moss in your shoe and drink a little vinegar, and you ain't got to worry about taking no blood pressure.
right. That is right.
So you know, so we, you know, we dealt with those kind of issues, and then of course, I remember the big thing for black men, because I started focusing on black men, because I recognized that the lifespan of black men in the United States of America is lower than any group of men in the world. People don't realize that. And the reason why is because black men have all of these myths and untruths, and that we are so strong, and that it's not mandated to talk about health issues if you get sick.
Right.
And then I started recognizing that a lot of black men die because they don't follow through with what the doctor tells them. A lot of us die because we don't even go to the doctor. We think that because you feel good, you are good. That's the furthest thing from the truth. So we, as a part of Closing the Gap, we started doing a very popular talk that I was giving and that I still give, and it's called Barbershop Talk. And after, actually I named it after my dad. My dad was a barber,
Okay.
John Hamilton Bell, and I remember going to the barbershop, sitting there waiting to get a haircut. Black men, when they come into the barbershop, you talk about all kinds of things.
That's right.
And I said, well, you know, I'm gonna start doing these barbershop talks, and I'm gonna do them in churches. So I did my first barbershop talk at Mount Moriah,
Up in North Charleston.
up in North Charleston. It was sponsored by Trident Hospital. Over the years, I picked up that men don't like to talk about health issues in front of women.
Right.
So I made it for men only. We had over 300 men show up for that.
It's good. Yeah.
It was supposed to be an hour long. It ended up being 2.5 hours long.
Wow.
We even invited Darrell Ravenel to come up and play some music.
Yeah.
I don't know, do you remember this?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. we invited Darrell, you know, because I said, but Darrell, let's put in some music. We're gonna let men know, but they're gonna listen to a little jazz, and then I'm gonna talk about diabetes. And it was really eye-opening for me because the questions just started coming in from just everywhere, and we couldn't get out of there. So I knew I was onto something. So that's to kind of give you. We also did one for women, for ladies, and the name was called Beauty Shop Talk. And I named it after my mom. I used to always hear when I was growing up, my mother's greatest pastime was talking on the telephone on Saturday, and the only thing I always heard was, "Gone Girl." She'd be encouraging her friends. That's the way they talked, so I
Right.
named it the Gone Girl Talk.
Okay.
Yeah. And so they were very, very popular and continue to be popular. In fact, the last one that I gave, Gone Girl Talk, I gave the Gone Girl Talk at Hilton Head to about 1,000 women. It was I got invited to be the speaker for a Christian group the AME Church. They had their annual conference down in Hilton Head. And I gave a talk there. And the interesting thing about that talk, I reserved 20 minutes to talk about health issues of men to women.
Oh, yeah. It's very important as well.
Right. And I couldn't get out of the place. So I knew I was on the right track. Yeah.
Now, I just to sort of wrap things up and bring it full circle for me being a musician.
Yes.
Over the last few years, how many years has the
the Lowcountry Jazz Festival has been going on for 10 years until the pandemic started.
Right. Well, thank you. I've been very fortunate enough to have appeared on the show.
We certainly appreciate the contribution that you made to making that entire venture successful. And as I was telling you before we got started, you know, one of my main partners with Closing the Gap was my daughter Tanisha. And when she developed cancer, I remember she asked me, she said, "Dad, you think Carlton will do a benefit for me?" And I said, "Well, let's call him and ask him." And of course you did. And of course you were there when we inaugurated the scholarship that we started at the Medical University.
Right, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. Now that event, I remember when it was a day. It was just, the festival was just one day, and then I remember it grew to as many as 4 days?
We went to 4 days, that's right.
Wow.
And it was really kind of interesting. My wife Cynthia and some other folk recommended that we do a jazz festival because we had to figure out a way to make money for Closing the Gap. And the only way that we could do it, I decided that I would invest about $75,000 to put on the jazz festival. So the proceeds from the jazz festival, the profits, we used to stay on radio and television.
Right.
As well as start a scholarship for African American students at the Medical University.
Very nice, yeah.
So we have started that scholarship. It is endowed now. In fact, you remember when it was endowed.
Very much.
You,
I was
you
there,
played
yeah.
at the ceremonies.
Yeah.
And so that scholarship we give every year. It's a $10,000 scholarship to an African American student at MUSC and they don't have to be in medical school. It can be just a student who's matriculating. And so we have a process in which they have to apply for it, and whoever wins, we give them a $10,000 scholarship. And so that's what the Lowcountry Jazz Festival was responsible for funding. Now, in addition to that, the Lowcountry Jazz Festival just kind of like went off the charts.
Oh yeah, it's definitely on the map. It's on the list of festivals that a lot of the contemporary jazz artists want to come to.
That's right.
When you look at it, and I was talking with a mutual friend of ours, Jazzy.
Yeah.
And he said,
who played a role in helping us get started?
Right,
Yeah.
right. Local radio personality, and just super lover of contemporary jazz.
Right.
And he told me something one time. He said, you know, really, there's only a few really major contemporary jazz festivals in the United States. There's a handful of them, and all of your sort of A-list contemporary jazz musicians just basically kind of bounce around from those to those festivals, to play. And he said, watch, Lowcountry is going to become that. And I remember him telling me this about maybe year 2 or year 3 or something like that. And he's right. I mean, some of the people that you've had, that have played at this festival are definitely the top 2% of or 1% of the contemporary jazz world, and R&B as well.
Right. One of the things that we we did not appreciate in the beginning. We thought that it was going to be just a local event. We had no idea that our support was going to come from around the country.
It sure has, yeah.
So when we realized that, we started tracking where people were buying the tickets, where they came from. We had people coming as far away as Los Angeles, California. Because if you looked at our lineup, we had world-class, including yourself,
Thank you.
world-class artists coming from all over the world. And we had people calling us, asking us to participate in the Lowcountry Jazz Festival. So as a result, we switched our venue from North Charleston down here in the city of Charleston to the Gilliard.
Right here on this stage.
Right here on the stage. And the city of Charleston became one of our partners. And so we've had two very, very successful jazz festivals, and we are recognized as one of the best jazz festivals in the country, if not the world. We have artists calling us all the time.
Boney James, Najee. I remember one of the highlights for me was opening up for the late great Al Jarreau.
Oh, that was incredible, wasn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah. And you know what? After he performed, he called me back the next year, and he was like in the twilight of his career.
Yeah.
He said he had such a good time.
Yeah.
So yeah, we had
Gerald Albright,
Yeah.
Randy Crawford. You know, it's just been an amazing run of musicians.
Yeah,
so
so
who's who?
So we were very, very fortunate. So people want to know, well, how's that connected to Closing the Gap? The Lowcountry Jazz Festival was the financial arm of Closing the Gap. And it all started just on a hunch.
Yeah. Well, that's a big hunch it's grown into.
Yeah,
now.
it all started on a hunch, and so we've been very, very successful. The pandemic stopped this year. We're looking forward to doing it again whenever we can fill up this auditorium again. So we're looking forward to doing that.
Dr. Bell, it's been a pleasure having you here on Raising the Volume, and we certainly appreciate that all of the work and all of the tips and everything that you do for everyone in the community, especially in the African American community. Thank you so much for being on our show.
Well, thank you very, very much for asking me. I certainly have enjoyed it.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you, and we'll see you on the next episode.
I get scared sometimes.
But as I always say,
It's okay to be afraid
as long as you face the fear.
and keep moving forward.
Wherever you are in life, count on the name trusted in insurance for over 70 years. BlueCross BlueShield of South Carolina.